This video is brought to you by Ground News. Donald Trump loves tariffs. He spent most of his first 100 days whacking, or threatening to whack, them on basically all America's major trading partners, and memorably claimed that tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. However, in the past couple of weeks or so, with markets recoiling at his trade policies, Trump has staged at least a rhetorical U-turn, and it looks like he's now winding some of the tariffs back, despite no obvious concessions from America's trading partners. So in this video, we're going to look at Trump's tentative U-turn and explain what went wrong. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's just start by taking a look at Trump's recent tariffs. The first round of tariffs really came just hours after Trump was sworn in on January the 2nd, when the new president announced an additional 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico, starting February the 1st. Then, on February the 1st, Trump whacked the promised 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, as well as an additional 10% tariff on China, which was already facing an average tariff rate of about 20%. On February the 10th, Trump then whacked another 25% tariff on all foreign steel and aluminium imports, and on March the 4th, another 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. This was then followed by a 25% tariff on all cars on March the 26th and Liberation Day on April the 2nd. As you probably remember, this was when Trump slapped a 10% tariff on all imports coming, and some ridiculously high flat tariffs on basically all of America's trading partners, which were apparently calculated by just dividing each country's bilateral trade deficit with the US against its total exports to give a percentage, which Trump then halved if he felt like it. While most countries were sort of shell-shocked by this announcement, China immediately responded with retaliatory tariffs, sparking a tit-for-tat trade war that ultimately resulted in America placing a 145% tariff on all Chinese imports, and China placing a 125% tariff on all American imports. So, why was Trump so keen on tariffs? Well, when Trump praises tariffs, which happens pretty often, he cites at least 4 reasons. First, he thinks they're a good way of reducing America's trade deficit. The theory here seems to be that, by making foreign imports more expensive, tariffs encourage American consumers to buy American goods instead, meaning fewer imports. Second, he thinks they're a good way of reindustrializing America. Again, the theory here seems to be that, by making foreign imports more expensive, tariffs protect American producers and manufacturers, which in turn helps America rebuild its manufacturing base. Trump thinks this is both good for America's national security, because it reduces America's dependence on foreign imports, and a good way of remedying the trade deficit, because American manufacturers should eventually become internationally competitive and then start exporting. Third, Trump thinks that tariffs can provide a meaningful source of revenue for the federal government, and even apparently replace income tax. And fourth, Trump thinks tariffs are a good negotiating tool, because most countries run bilateral trade surpluses with the US, and Trump seems to think that this means that other countries need access to the American market, i.e. need American consumers to buy their stuff, more than America needs access to their markets. However, in the past couple of weeks, Trump's enthusiasm for tariffs has apparently waned. On April the 9th, Trump announced a 90-day pause on all Liberation Day tariffs, apart from those affecting China. Then, despite originally insisting that China needs to make a deal with us, we don't have to make a deal with them, on Tuesday, Trump staged a rhetorical U-turn, telling reporters that tariffs on China will come down substantially, and that he wouldn't play hardball. This comes after similar comments made by Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Monday, who described the current tariff situation with China as unsustainable. The Wall Street Journal then reported Trump was considering more than halving the tariffs on China, despite no concessions from China, and on Wednesday, Bessent gave a speech where he said America first does not mean America alone, calling for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners, a marked change from the bellicose tone we've seen so far. So, why is Trump apparently soured on tariffs, at least rhetorically? Well, it's worth saying that, so far, the tariffs had failed to achieve any of their stated aims. America's trade deficit had actually grown. US manufacturing was struggling to deal with both the unpredictability of Trump's tariff regime and the increased cost of imported components, with US manufacturing stocks down about 20% from their January peak. Leaving aside the fact that no serious economist thought tariffs could ever replace income tax, or that this goal was incompatible with Trump's trade deficit-related aspirations, after all, less imports will mean lower tariff revenues, the revenue generated by tariffs so far has been underwhelming, with the CBP putting it at just $500 million in mid-April. And finally, Trump's tariffs have been surprisingly unsuccessful as a negotiating tool. While it's true that most economists think tariffs usually hurt the surplus country more than the deficit country, at least when it comes to GDP, world leaders have quickly realised that there's political capital to be gained in standing up to Trump. And few countries want to capitulate to Trump this early on. After all, we're only 100 days into his term, and world leaders know that, if they capitulate now, Trump might well push them for more concessions later on. In China's case specifically, it also turns out that American consumers really like cheap Chinese goods, which is why Trump had to recently carve out exemptions for Chinese-made phones and laptops. Conversely, Trump's tariffs have proved remarkably unpopular domestically, and this political pressure has clearly played a role in his recent U-turn. Analysis by G. Elliott Morris over on his Substack suggests that Trump has a net negative approval rating when it comes to handling the economy, trade and inflation, with especially bad numbers on trade and inflation. This compares poorly with Trump's first term, when the economy was one of his electoral strengths. This is probably in large part because the markets really don't like Trump's tariffs, or how he's carrying them out, which is why there's been a massive sell-off of American assets in the past couple of weeks. This has been bad news for American stocks, the dollar and American bonds, which have all fallen in recent weeks. Not only has this upset any American with money in the stock market, it's also pushed the US to the brink of a debt crisis as borrowing costs surge. Not only does this make it more expensive for the US to borrow more money, and the Republican budget Trump recently endorsed implies another $5.8 trillion in borrowing over the next 10 years, it's also made servicing America's pre-existing debt pile, which already costs the US about $1 trillion a year, even more expensive. This is a big reason Trump has been pushing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to cut interest rates, which would bring down borrowing costs. But Powell has refused, citing the inflationary risks of Trump's tariffs. Trump's comments actually exacerbated the sell-off in American bonds, which is why, on Tuesday, he was forced into another U-turn, telling reporters he had, quote, no intention of firing Powell. All in all, it looks like the market reaction has finally forced Trump to at least soften his tariffs, and the big question is whether he'll try again in the near future. There's a lot to unpack here though, with the story reported on by more than 242 sources. Interestingly, we can see that of those, 29% came from left-leaning outlets, while 13% came from outlets that lean right. Looking at the headlines, you can also see some differences, with right-leaning outlets subtly attributing success to the administration, and left-leaning sources instead highlighting the erratic policymaking that initially bruised markets. We're able to do that because of our sponsor Ground News, whose incredible website and app lets you discover the news and pulls back the curtain on media bias. Built by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news, with Ground News ingesting over 50,000 articles from all over the world, and then organising each by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. But one of the best parts of the app is their blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other, helping you better break out of your media bubble and discover what those on the other side of the political spectrum are really saying. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the unlimited Access Vantage plan using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.